Oh my gosh, there's a mass exodus in the portal at Colorado. Everything's fine.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, and of course, the transfer portal and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Colorado will check in with a potential playoff team in Oregon State. They did not impress on Saturday. What does that actually mean? And more from the portal coming up later in today's show, including one guy who's found a home and will go make an impact for a team looking to make a surge in the SEC. But we start with Deion. You know what I find most irritating about Deion Sanders? It's not actually Deion himself. It's that as a college football community, we're apparently incapable of having a rational discussion. You are either the biggest Colorado fan in the world, he could never do anything wrong, annoying, irritating, or anything of the sorts, or you're just the biggest hater and everything is a disaster, and every time a player leaves, it means that Deion Sanders is losing his grip on college football and it's utter chaos. There's no in between. I'm going to try. I have, for a long time, talking about Deion Sanders, attempted to thread the needle here. Colorado is not having a mass wild exodus in the transfer portal. Do you know where the Buffs transfer portal class sits nationally right now? 6th. How do you spell... Again, I think it's people who are not particular fans of Deion Sanders. You think whatever you want. But they interpret things that are more commonplace at other schools as a bigger deal because it's Deion. And conversely, the people who love Deion treat commonplace coaching moves or successes as a bigger deal because it's Deion. So Colorado's not having some mass portal exodus in that they're having a bunch of players leave and they've just got nobody coming in. If I asked you right now, what is the plus minus in either plus meaning a net gain or minus meaning a net loss of players to Colorado via the transfer portal? What do you think? What do you think that number is? Take a guess. Okay, you've had a moment to guess. It's -3. They've lost 31 players to the portal, and I could spin that very easily as, it's a disaster. Cormani McClain, who we'll get to in a moment, is taking shots at Deion, and look at all this stuff. It's terrible. They've brought in 28 players, and they're not bringing in bums all the time. They're bringing in guys that are going to help them. They're going to make them a better team. It's why their win total jumped from 4.5 to 5.5. Rumors have swirled around that is solely because of the discussion about Colorado on this very show. That's not yet confirmed. Anyway, so I think the Buffs are a bowl team in 2024. I think their ceiling is probably 8 wins. I think that is their uppermost ceiling. Watch, some people in the comment section will find a reason to get upset at that particular statement. But when you have brought in 3 fewer players than you've lost, this is not a mass portal exodus. They're just very busy in the portal. That's what they do. They bring in a lot of players because they're willing to let guys go at a rate that is higher than a lot of other schools across the country. So I just don't buy into this notion that Colorado is in some death spiral or that their roster is just getting gutted or depleted or anything like that. I see them bringing in pieces that are going to help them. I see them losing pieces that can help other teams. Kind of sounds, just on a grander scale, a little bit because of the numbers, like every other team in the portal. You lose guys you would have liked to have kept. You get guys who you're really excited about, and you see how they fit into your system there. So that brings us to Cormani McClain, who I've talked about here on the show before. He was the number 1 cornerback in the class of 2023, and he has not yet been picked up in the transfer portal. We'll see who ends up grabbing the former 5-star recruit, but he released a video, and in that video, he talked about how he wanted to go somewhere where he wasn't just playing for clicks. Is he trying to get on Dan Lanning's radar? I don't know. You tell me. McClain was not really recruited by Oregon out of high school, and the Ducks have 1 million players in the secondary, so I don't expect that to be a potential fit there. But if you interpret that as some not so thinly veiled shot at Deion Sanders, it probably is. Guess what? He happens to go public with it because it elevates his platform. It's a smart strategic move. Gets his name out there, generates a little bit of buzz. Do you know how many players have entered the transfer portal? I don't off the top of my head. It's a couple thousand. How many of them feel about the head coaches they are leaving the way that Cormani McClain publicly stated he felt about Deion Sanders in Colorado here? Do you think Cormani McClain is the only one that feels that way? Because in no way, shape, or form am I buying that. Some guys just don't air that sort of stuff publicly, and it's fine. It's a decision. I see both ways to go about it. I'd take the high road personally, but if he wants to get down in it, more power to him. If he thinks it's beneficial, okay, that's great. Does not mean that everything is just terrible and wrong at Colorado. Perfect example. You can see all sorts of headlines and tweets and everything about another guy leaving Colorado. Another guy's leaving. Another guy's doing this. Have you seen anything about the players that they've brought in? Because they brought in a former 4-star offensive lineman from Texas in Peyton Kirkland, who's going to add much needed depth at Colorado's biggest position of need this offseason, which they have done overall a good job of addressing in both the portal and bringing in a high school guy like Jordan Seaton, who's the top offensive tackle in the 2024 class. I'd expect him to play at least some sort of role this year for the Buffs. Or what about Ryan Buell or Dayon Hayes along the defensive line? They've also brought in BJ Green, who was once committed to Washington, transferring from Arizona State, then decided to go to Colorado instead. Do you see as many headlines about that? Is it as catchy, or is it as flashy, or is it as appealing to the anti-Deion Sanders crowd if you see that they're bringing in pieces that are going to make them a better nuts and bolts football team in 2024? Didn't think you did. Didn't think you did. You're hearing or watching it, of course, here on this show, because that's just how we roll. But I think all this discussion or any headline you see about Deion Sanders is losing control, he's losing all these guys. He got a top 10 transfer portal class. You know how many schools can say they have a top 10 transfer portal class? 10. You know how many FBS Division I football programs there are? About 130, somewhere in that range, approximately. How many at the power level? 70 plus. Yeah, that's they're just fine. Colorado is a better team than they were last year, which was not a very good team. They went 4-8. They won one Pac-12 game. They had those big early wins against TCU and Nebraska, and then they were humbled from there on out. And they won one Pac-12 game. Guess what? They're going to win more than that in the Big 12 this year. Get ready for it. Get ready. Don't come at me and say, "Hey, Spencer, why don't you think Colorado can make the jump to be a Big 12 contender?" Because I think the Big 12's got a pretty deep conference this year, and I think it's going to be wildly entertaining. But Colorado, make no mistake about it, because of the portal, is a better team than they were a season ago. And I expect them to at least go 6-6, maybe 7-5. Is America ready for that? Maybe not. There's a reminder that I haven't given out on this show in far too long, and it bears repeating because, well, it's important. First, this episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you find and hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. That's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is a reminder that I have not been giving to all of you, especially my everydayers out there, frequently enough, that a group of 5 team is going to make the playoff. And unfortunately, that's where Oregon State essentially find themselves right now. Carter Bahns covers the Beavs over at beaverblitz.com, also writes for 24/7 Sports, joining me here on the show. Oregon State had their spring game on Saturday at Corvallis, Carter, and there were some positive takeaways, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, where the Beavs are expected to be stronger, but the quarterbacks did not exactly wow anybody the way Aiden Childs did a season ago.
I think that is kind of the perfect encapsulation of the Oregon State spring game. It was a defensive affair, very, very few points scored. The winning team, the scoring metrics and whatnot in the spring games and the timing and everything is off. But, a 10-7 ball game is defensive one way or the other. When you get into the different ways that you score these things. And for the quarterbacks to have such a shaky performance, I don't know is entirely indicative of where this team stands, just because you're working in new guys who are coming in through the transfer portal. You're working in a brand new coaching staff, minus, just maybe 2 or 3 position group coaches off the top of my head. And generally just a lot of uncertainty. And again, like you're still putting everything together. You're still putting the pieces together. So it's a spring game. Everything's vanilla. You've got all these new guys. How much can you read into it? I don't know. But the bottom line is there has to be improvement between now and the season, because if that is the product of Oregon State that you see in week 1, that is not a college football playoff contender. That is not a team that's going to go out and beat all of its Mountain West competition. The Beavs need to be better than they showed. I think they will be, just because it's a spring game and it's very early in this process, but not good enough.
Yeah, and Jabari Johnson comes over from Missouri. Giovanni McCoy comes in from Idaho. Ben Gulbranson still on the roster. Those are the quarterbacks Oregon State has to work with in 2024. And right now, I would look and say, okay, if Oregon State's going to be a playoff team, which they absolutely could be, they'd have to win 11 or 12 games. And now that would be a difficult feat to achieve, no doubt about it, but impossible with their schedule? No, I don't think so. Our friends at FanDuel haven't given a win total there, but I'd imagine it's probably in the 8.5, 7.5 sort of range if they were to churn one out. And there are quality opponents on the schedule. And you look at the way they can, build up wins. It's not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. Now, they're not going to be a conference champion, of course, because they don't have, a conference to play in really at the moment. But none of that matters, Carter, if you can't get better production out of the quarterback. So do you think that one of those 2 newcomers via the transfer portal stood out so far for Oregon State? Or is this just seemingly an open battle?
It's an open battle. Jabari Johnson didn't even practice for much of camp. He was still working his way back from an injury of some sort. I want to say he practiced about 4 or 5 times, came back and played in the spring game, and frankly, at times just looked lost. He was one of the guys who I thought was most impacted by that defensive pressure. Giovanni McCoy, nothing special in the spring game. Ben Gulbranson didn't play, and then Dom Montiel, the walk-on, was probably the most solid of the quarterbacks, and you ideally don't want to see a walk-on be the best of your quarterbacks. Now, Oregon State is very well known for producing former walk-ons, turned scholarship players, turned stars. Jonathan Smith, obviously a walk-on himself. As a player, Katano Ladapo is probably going to be hearing his name called here in a couple of days at the NFL draft. So, Oregon State could be fine theoretically if a walk-on comes out and shines, but that's not what you want to see in your spring game. It's not what you want to see when you're standing here, 5 months away from week 1. So again, I think part of it comes back to these are quarterbacks who are trying to learn a system, who are trying to get acclimated to new receivers that in Johnson and McCoy's case, they don't know because they're coming in from new schools. They've only been here for 2 months, 3 months at most. And you're still piecing that together, and then you add in the element there with Johnson only practicing a couple of times. You would expect to see the defense a few steps ahead of the offense at this point in the process.
So Oregon State has not had a great go of it in the transfer portal, not just with their football team, but really across their athletic department because of all this realignment craziness. But it does feel like things have kind of stabilized for now. And, Damian Martinez, that's a big name. He's still in the transfer portal looking for a home. Miami's rumored to be kind of the leader there. At least that was the last update that came out on that front. And certainly I've talked here on the show about how great of a fit I think Martinez would be with the Hurricanes and Mario Cristobal's offense. But what has Oregon State done to try and, fill the void that they didn't know until very recently Damian Martinez is leaving behind?
Well, there's not much they have done, but I expect now with camp over and camps finishing up across the country, and you're going to potentially see a little more transfer portal movement here in the next week. I think this is where Oregon State becomes active. This past week was all about guys entering. This is the time now, as practices conclude, as coaches have more time to hit the recruiting trail, that you're going to start to see guys commit. And I am curious to see where Oregon State goes, running back in particular, because they already got Anthony Hankerson in the previous window from Colorado, who I think has the chance to step in right away and be the starter. He and Jam Griffin, I think, are going to be a pretty nice two-headed attack for Oregon State. I think could be the next great Oregon State two-headed running back attack. It seems like the Beavers have had one of those every year for, just about the last 20 years now. So I don't necessarily know that they're in dire need at running back, but I am curious to see how they approach that situation, because at the very least, you're losing depth because everybody has to step up a spot when Martinez leaves. If Hankerson was going to be your second or third guy, he's your first or second guy. That moves everyone up, and now you have another space on your depth chart that you need to fill there. But I think the other positions are where Oregon State is probably going to emphasize. I would like to see them go out and get another receiver. Defensively, of course, getting some depth on the front is always a priority at Oregon State, because it's a position group that, frankly, they just don't recruit particularly well from the prep ranks. So, again, I think these next couple of weeks is where Oregon State hits it hard. Scholarship-wise, they have more guys than they can really hold, but I think you'll see movement go in and out here over the next week as this portal window hits week 2 of 2.
Does Oregon State have the ability right now, with the schedule they have and just kind of the entire vibe around the program and, kind of an aura of uncertainty, which, I've said before, makes this season all the more important? Like, if you go out and go 10-2 this year, if you're Oregon State or Washington State for that matter, I think that really helps legitimize the status that you do have, right? It's not as good as it was. You can't get to that level at this point in time, but to make the best of it, you have to, be able to put a product on the field that's appealing to players across the country. But what is the pitch right now to go play for Oregon State football?
Well, the sell is very clear. Trent Bray made this clear from essentially the minute he landed the head coaching job, is that at Oregon State moving forward, you have a chance on an annual basis to make the college football playoff, because all you need to do is be the best group of 5 team, be the best team outside of that traditional power conference structure. And, we can talk down the line about how that looks 2 years from now, but for these 2 years, all you got to do is just be the highest ranked team outside of the Power 4 conferences, and you're going to have a seat at the table. And that's the sell. It's, if you're a high enough.
Well, but for the next 2 years specifically, it's highest ranked group of 5 conference champion. Oregon State and Washington State would be looking at an at-large spot, which, as I said, because of the quality of their schedules, they've both got Oregon and Washington on there. You win those games and a couple other Power 4 games, and you win, only lose one time. 11-1 with quality wins, that at the very least will get a look.
Yeah, you're very important semantics there. College football playoff expansion is just wild. But yes, anyways, the sell there is that you still have a chance to compete at the highest level. And in some ways, you have a path that could be seen as favorable, because Oregon State has the resources and, probably the coaching resources and the talent base, at least right now, to compete at a really high level in the group of 5 ranks. Oregon State right now, even with all of its departures and all of its coaching change, still has a roster, an athletic department, a football program, and the resources that it needs to compete in the upper half of the Mountain West at a bare minimum, if not the very top of the Mountain West right away. And that is something that I think you can sell to someone who, again, going back to this second half of the portal window, someone who maybe at a Power 5 or a Power 4 school hears, you're not really in our starting plans this year. Oh, I'm going to go enter the transfer portal. Oh, here's a team that I can compete right away. I know that I have a starting spot at this school, Oregon State, and we're going to win a bunch of games. Like, I think that's really appealing to kind of a bounce back type player, which Oregon State has been a destination for in the past.
Carter Bahns, Beaver Blitz, and 24/7 Sports, the latest from Corvallis. Carter, thanks for stopping by. Good to see you, man.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Some of those transfers I've talked about recently have found homes. We'll check in on them. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use with a great interface. So, ask yourself this question. Do you want to spice up any of the aforementioned events or anything else? If the answer is yes, then what are you waiting for? Go to FanDuel, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. So last week on some bonus content that is only available over on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast, make sure you keep up over there with all the transfer portal coverage that we've got for you here at Locked On College Football all week and all portal season long, of course. I mentioned one Philip Blidi. He's in transfer from Indiana. He's had other stops in his career, and he has played, let's just say, a few seasons of college football, and for his final one, he's going to the Auburn Tigers. Now, is this a guy that anybody expects to go into Auburn and be an absolute game wrecker in the SEC of all places? That is, shall we say, very well known for its play in the trenches. Is he going to go in and dominate and turn himself into a first-round NFL draft pick? No, he's not. But here's what you are going to get with Philip Blidi, a guy who is in college game shape, as they say, on account of, he's been in the weight room for 5-6 years, and he's someone who's going to come in and bring a high floor. And those sorts of guys are underrated because the all-conference guys, those are the flashy names. Those are the guys that, catch everybody's attention, and they are putting up big numbers all throughout the year. Interior defensive linemen aren't like that. They aren't. They're just guys that show up and make an impact play after play after play, and you don't always see it. It doesn't always materialize in the box score. This is a position of need for Auburn, and Washington was also going after Philip Blidi. This isn't someone who, had Auburn as his best or only good option out there. Washington and other schools were interested. Auburn ends up landing him. It's a nice get for the Tigers. So he has found a home. There's still a lot of names in the transfer portal who have not yet found homes. Jaden Rashada is one of them. So I talked about Rashada on Friday's show and how I think Georgia is a perfect fit. You can go to a place where you're not in the headlines. You go to the best program in college football, a great head coach, good offensive coordinator, good veteran quarterback to learn from in Carson Beck. Plus, they have some other talented guys in that room who he'd probably compete with for the starting job in 2025, not 2024. But is that the only place where he could fit? No, not necessarily. So Rashada's lone year at Arizona State, he flashed the potential. From time to time, you'd see him make throws, show off the arm talent or the mobility, and you'd see these glimpses of, oh boy, he had a lot of stars and a big number next to his name coming out of high school. I think that was why. So he does need time. He is not someone who can go anywhere and start right away. I present to you two schools he has been tied to in which this can absolutely work. One of them, the aforementioned Auburn Tigers. You have a veteran quarterback in Peyton Thorne. You have an offensive head coach in Hugh Freeze. They threw for 162 yards per game last year. That was last in the SEC. I don't expect that to continue. You look at Hugh Freeze's track record with offense, I don't expect that to continue. If Peyton Thorne is the starter this year, I bet he'll have a better season in year two at the helm with the transfer portal moves that they have made, the way their offensive line is expected to play. Auburn should be a better football team than they were a year ago. But if Rashada were to go to Auburn, you would suddenly have a guy that has got a little bit of experience. Maybe he's not your lead backup quarterback, but he'd certainly be your top option going into 2025, or among them at the very least. He'd be the biggest name, at least outside of Auburn, that people know as to who could start for the Tigers in 2025. And I'm just a fan of any time you can go somewhere. You look at what Dante Moore is doing up at Oregon. He's going to go sit behind who? Veteran quarterback Dillon Gabriel. Rashada could go to Auburn and sit by who? Behind who? Veteran quarterback Peyton Thorne. And go to a place where you should be pretty well supported. I mean, Cam Coleman is an incoming true freshman. He's going to be a little bit more seasoned at the very least by the time Rashada could be the starter. You know what a quarterback's best friend is? A number one receiver like Cam Coleman. He and Ryan Williams both could be two of the best receivers in college football this year as true freshmen. Remember, this is a loaded wide receiver class that's going to the NFL. So a lot of talent has been taken out of the sport, and there's a lot of talent brought in. Do not be surprised if either Cam Coleman or Ryan Williams, I think Williams with Bama has got the better quarterback in Jalen Milroe compared to Peyton Thorne. Don't be surprised if one of those guys has a 1,000-yard plus season, or maybe even something better than that. They are tremendously talented, ready to play right away. Cam Coleman might be the best wide receiver on Auburn's roster. Might. I said might. But Rashada would be an intriguing option there at the very least. He's also been linked reportedly to Mississippi State, which is an intriguing situation because the Bulldogs are in rebuild mode. This is going to be year one with Jeff Lebby. It did not work out with Zach Arnett this past season, and they quickly make a move. They bring in Lebby from Oklahoma, offensive coach. They had a great offense with Dillon Gabriel last year with the Sooners. I don't know if that's a perfect spot for Jaden Rashada to go, but I can definitely think of worse places for him to end up, because when you are looking for your next home and you're a guy who's had Rashada's track record, you want to go somewhere where you don't have expectations, right? You don't have to perform at a high level. You can kind of be out of the spotlight, which is why I think being a backup at Georgia or Auburn would be a really good situation. If he were to go to Mississippi State, could he have a better chance of playing? Yeah, they're not expected to be very good this year. They are probably going to be towards the bottom of the SEC. But on the flip side of that coin, if the Bulldogs were to land him, would they start him? Would they at least play him a little bit, allow him to develop because you're building for the future? I can see that argument. I can absolutely see it. So those are two schools that popped up for Rashada, who is the biggest quarterback name in the portal right now. And, somehow, some way, I don't know how, but an Ohio State quarterback is yet to put his name in the transfer portal. Maybe it is that open of a competition. Maybe there are 3 or 4 guys that think I could be the starting quarterback. Maybe Will Howard and Julian Sayin and Devin Brown. Maybe they all think that. And Aaron Nolan and Lincoln Keenholz are just sitting there going, we're good. We'll just, wait our turn, wait for our time, wait for our moment, that sort of thing. It's a curious situation to say the least. I want to close, since we talk about the transfer portal a healthy amount on this show, as we should. It's popping right now. I want to close with something that just embodies part of the craziness of college football right now. So, do you know the name Adam Kasai? No, probably not. He's in the transfer portal. Who is he? Well, he was a 4-star edge prospect who committed to Clemson. He's now transferring out of Clemson. And will Clemson bring anybody in to replace him in the portal? No, probably not. Do you know what recruiting class Kasai came to Clemson as a member of? Wait for it. Wait for it. I feel like Barney Stinson here. Wait for it. 2024. 2024 commit. Portal. It's April 22nd. He's been there for an hour. He's barely played. He's in the portal. So when you hear coaches talk about it's hard to coach in this environment, it's difficult to be here, it's difficult to do this, it's difficult to do that, and people push back and say, oh, you're paid a bunch of money, you shouldn't care, you're just upset that players have power. Do you know what went in to recruiting a guy of that caliber? You had to scout him. You had to go see him in person. You had to develop a relationship. You had to foster that relationship over many months. You had to get him to ultimately commit. You had to get him to put his name on paper on signing day. You had to get him to campus. You had to do about 18 different steps for him to put on a Clemson uniform, all for him to say, I'm going elsewhere. I'm not relaying this information because it's a sign that Dabo Swinney can't win in college football. I think this year is going to be really telling for Dabo. I think he's got to at least push for an ACC conference title game appearance, or else questions will be raised and they'll be legitimate about whether or not you can push back on NIL in the portal and not lean into those elements of college football and still succeed in today's world. I think those can be fair questions to be asked. But I empathize with coaches because that's crazy. That's crazy. I don't know the details of the situation. I don't know exactly why he transferred. I'd imagine it's because of playing time. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just saying, a 2024 commit without a coaching change, Julian Sayin at Alabama is one thing. He commits to Nick Saban leaves, and then Sayin, enrolls at Alabama, transfers to Ohio State. That's one thing. This is another thing, and it's pretty crazy. That's the transfer portal for you. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.